Welcome back. Now we're going to begin our lesson on MLA. And as I've shown you in class many times before, we are using the MLA handbook. I have the 7th edition, the 8th edition is out now. As I'm sure you've already been doing these last few weeks, you've been finding the information online or in the book. And I just want to go over a few things in the book so that it helps you to do your papers in a more correct manner, which will lead to your getting more points, which I'm sure is something we both want. All right, now to begin with, I'm going to go over a little bit about italicized titles. Now, you may remember on some of your papers that I've marked down, when things should be in italics, when you've underlined or you've put it in quotation marks. For italicized titles, you are going to italicize the names of books, plays, poems published as books, like the Iliad, pamphlets, like Federalist Papers, periodicals, and periodicals mean newspapers, magazines, and journals, websites, online databases, films, television and radio broadcasts, CDs, audio cassettes, if any of you have ever listened to an audio cassette, record albums, if any of you have ever listened to a record album, dance performances, operas, and other long musical compositions, defined by form, number, and key. Let's see, like Beethoven's Symphony No. 7 in A, Opus 92. So something like that you would put in italics, if you're citing it. I mean, I don't see why you would in this particular class, but just letting you know. Also, you part in italics the works of visual art, ships, aircraft, and spacecraft, like the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, you would put in italics. Or the USS Arizona, you would put that in italics as well. For titles that go in quotation marks, those are the titles of articles, essays, stories and poems in larger works, like a short story in a collection, chapters of books, pages within websites, individual episodes of TV and radio broadcasts, and short musical compositions mean songs, like a 3 or 4 minute song. You also use quotation marks for unpublished works, such as lectures, like this one, and speeches, like something the president would give. Now, for titles and quotations within titles, you italicize the title normally indicated by italics when it appears within a title enclosed in quotation marks. For instance, if the entire speech or the entire television program or something said, quote, Romeo and Juliet in politics, unquote. Romeo and Juliet would be in italics, the rest in politics, all over here, everything's backwards, in politics would not be italicized. Or if you had an article about a novel, such as discussing numbers in Stephen King's The Stand. That would be in quotes, because that's an article, but the words The Stand, because it's the title of a book, would be in italics, but only those two words. Now, you enclose in single quotation marks a title normally indicated by quotes when it appears within another title, such as, and this is both for a quotation and it's also for a speech, such as the book gives an example of a poem about a poem, and the poem is, quote, lines after reading, single quote, sailing to Byzantium, single quote, double quote. Such as the theory of life in The Walking Dead. Now that's not a good Okay, the theory of life as seen by Snow White, and Snow White would be in single quotes because it's the title of a story. And it's the same thing, such as if you had a title of a story, if in dialogue, or in your interviews from your first paper, or if you interview anybody again, you know, he said, quote, the double quotes. I always liked the story, single quote, Cinderella, single quote, because it was really fancy, period, double quotes. That's the end of the quote. So now, if there's any questions on any of this, please just let me know in class. Now, there will always be exceptions to every rule because this is obviously English. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, before I get to the exceptions. If a period is required after an italicized title that ends with a quotation mark, place the period before the quotes, such as, I saw this in, I'll just get back to Snow White. I saw this in, quote, Snow White, period, close quote. So it wouldn't be, I saw this in, quote, Snow White, quote, period. That would be wrong. Put the period inside before the closing quote. And that's if the italicized title ends with a quotation mark, if a period is required. Like if you're ending a sentence with it, basically. Now, the exceptions to this italicized rule apply to the names of Scripture, including all books and all versions of the Bible. Also of laws, acts, and similar political documents. That doesn't seem right. Laws and acts, yes, but political documents, I'm not sure. It wouldn't be something like the Constitution, though. Musical compositions identified by form and key, which goes in, and societies, buildings, and monuments, which I don't see why you would have. Well, you could have building or monument in your papers. Okay. Actually, no, they do include the Declaration as an exception. I don't know why they do that, but they do. So if you say the Constitution or the Declaration, you would not put that in italics. All right. So now the use of quotations. If a prose quotation runs no more than 4 lines and requires no special emphasis, you put it in quotes and incorporate it into the line, such as, quote, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times," close quote, "wrote Charles Dickens in the 18th century." Straightforward. You need not always reproduce complete sentences. Sometimes you may want to quote just a phrase as part of your sentence. And they give an example. For Charles Dickens, the 18th century was both, quote, "the best of times," close quote, and, quote, "the worst of times," period, close quote. Now again, and we've mentioned this before, that if you have a quote that ends in a period in the original, then that it's not the end of the sentence, then you change the period to a comma. For instance, the original example here, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." It's quote, "It's the best of times, it's the worst of times," comma, close quote, "wrote Charles Dickens," is what you would write if you were quoting. You may put a quotation at the beginning, middle, or end of your sentence, or, for the sake of variety, divide it by your own words. For instance, you can say, and they have, Joseph Conrad writes of the company manager in Heart of Darkness, quote, "He was obeyed, yet he inspired neither love nor fear, nor even respect, period," close quote. Or you can write it as, quote, "He was obeyed, comma, close quote, writes Conrad Johnson of the company manager in Heart of Darkness, open quote, "yet he inspired neither love nor fear or even respect, period," close quote. If a quotation ending a sentence requires a parenthetical reference, a citation, and they all will, well, I shouldn't say all, but 99% of yours will, place the sentence period after the reference. And you may remember we did this briefly the other day on the board. So it would be, for Charles Dickens, 18th century was, quote, the best of times and the worst of times, close quote, parenthesis, page 35, close parenthesis, period. So you'd have no punctuation where the period originally was at the end of a sentence. If it's the beginning, in the middle, you turn it into a comma. But if it's at the end, there's no punctuation. You have the parentheses and then the period. If a quotation extends to more than 4 lines when run into the text, then you set it off from your text by beginning a new line, indenting 1 inch, usually 2 tabs, from the margin, and typing it double-spaced without adding quotation marks. A colon generally introduces a quotation displayed in this way, though sometimes the context may require a different mark of punctuation, or none at all. If you quote only a single paragraph or part of one, do not indent the first line more than the rest. A parenthetical reference for a prose quotation set off from the text follows the last line of the quotation. And the best thing to do in this case is to just show you what they mean, where you see, or you can see it's, well, this is not very good, but it's supposed to be offset, and you see how this paragraph is not indented. And I know it's very hard to see, it's very fuzzy, but the last line, you see the parenthetical reference after, at the end of the quote. That's where it goes, and that's what this would look like. Okay. Now, if you need to quote 2 or more paragraphs, you indent the first line of each paragraph an additional 1/4 inch. And for that, you would do about 3 to 5 tappings of your space bar. in the first set, if the first sentence quoted does not begin a paragraph in the source, however, do not indent it the additional amount. Indent only the first lines of the next paragraph. For instance, and again, they show you an example here where you can see that this is indented and this is indented. Now, if you did not quote the first line, sorry, I'm trying to do this, it would look like that. The first line is not indented, but the line down here is. Okay. Poetry, I'm going to skip because we really don't do poetry in this class. Drama. I don't think, well, okay. I'm not going to go over drama right now because, again, I don't think it's going to be very common for you. If someone wants to go over drama when we get into class on Wednesday, I'm more than happy to do it. I just wanted to get all of the things that I know everybody will use first. All right. Now, for ellipsis, an ellipsis are the 3 dots, 1, 2, 3. Whenever you want to omit a word, phrase, or a sentence, or more from a quoted passage, you should be guided by 2 principles: fairness to the author that you're quoting, you cite him, and the grammatical integrity of your writing. For instance, if you only want to have this certain words that are most important, you put the ellipsis in, but don't keep it as a straight quote if the grammar changes. For instance, if the sentence is, the 2 boys went down to the river, they played and they did this and they did that and they did a lot of other things, and then Johnny went home, and then the final boy went to his home. Then you would say, the boys went to the river, ... and then went to his home. Well, that doesn't make any sense because you had boys and now you're saying his. So when you have something like that, you need to change the grammar, or you need to add an an explanatory note in brackets that to help the integrity of your writing. A quotation should never be presented in a way that could cause a reader to misunderstand the sentence in the original. Basically, don't do what the news does all the time. I mean, you'll see those things for what do you call movie reviews. It's dot 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 great dot 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 when really the original sentence was, this is really not a great movie. You don't want to do that. If you quote only a word or a phrase, it will be obvious. Excuse me, sorry, something happened. If you quote only a word or a phrase, it will be obvious that you left out some of the original sentence, so you don't need a quote. Don't need an ellipsis there, such as when John F. Kennedy spoke, he spoke of quote a new frontier end quote. I mean, you don't need the ellipsis because you're only quoting two words, and it's silly to have an ellipsis for just one word or two words or even 3, 4 words. If you have about 5 or more, then maybe you should start thinking about ellipsis. But even then, there's always exceptions because this is English. All right. Well, I'm going to stop with ellipsis now. And, okay. We haven't finished ellipsis, but we can finish that on Wednesday. Because I'm looking at the time. I'm noticing that we are now 46 minutes into the lesson. And what I have decided, in order to thank you, thank the 7 of you, I should say, very much for getting the workout on time before you went to your field training exercise. I am not assigning any homework tonight, Monday the 22nd, so you don't have to worry about scrambling to get something written for Wednesday. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I hope for those of you who have been missing class, I very much hope you return, and especially for those of you who have not handed in the second paper, I very much hope you return and you redouble your efforts in order to pass the class. Of course, I understand that everybody makes their own choices and everyone makes their own decisions, but I do not want to see anybody fail. I really don't. And again, if you've missed the first paper or the first 2 major papers, you still have a possibility of pulling this out, out of the dive. You can do 2 versions of the third paper and 2 versions of the fourth paper, or you can do 3 versions of the third paper and 1 version of the fourth paper. And remember, if you've missed either the first or the second paper, you have to do another completely different third paper at the same word count. For instance, if you did not hand in the second paper, which is 1,500 words, then you need to hand in 2 different papers for your third paper, both at 2,000 words. Because again, I'm giving you the chance to make it up, but because it wouldn't be fair to others who did get the paper in on deadline, you can make it up, but you do have to write to the higher word count. Okay. Any further questions, please let me know. Again, make sure to keep up with your journals and have a very good day. And I will see you all, I assume, I will see all of you on Wednesday. Thank you very much and have a good evening or morning. Sorry.